will feed our minds. We're pleased to have with us today Dr. Kadian Reed, who is Associate Professor and Director of Public Health Graduate and Undergraduate Programs at University of St. Joseph. Dr. Reed will be talking on the topic of more than social, how structural and political determinants shape health equity. Dr. Reed is a mixed methods social scientist who studies health outcomes among Black immigrants from the English-speaking Caribbean. She emphasizes the importance of ethnic identity in influencing health practices and outcomes for both children and adults. And without any further ado, I'm very pleased to present Dr. Kadian Reed.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction. Can you all hear me? Okay, perfect. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. As previously noted, my title is More Than Social, meaning looking at the conditions that we see in our day-to-day and how these structural and political determinants of health shape health equity and also racial equity outcomes. When I was first asked to present this topic or just present to you social justice, I had to think deeply about the topic I was going to talk about. I said deeply because my area of focus, given what you have heard, is really centered around health equity. And currently, those terminology, concepts are being questioned and attacked. But when I think about, we're still experiencing disparities, despite that we can't use some of these terminology pending the building or the organization we work for. We're still experiencing discriminations. And the list goes on. And what happened is it's still impacting individuals, families, and the communities that we come from. I didn't want to stand here and share the data. We already know the data. We already know that people of color, immigrant, other special groups are disproportionately impacted because we're not deemed majority, right? We have lived through the pandemic. We have seen family members who have experienced physical and mental health challenges. So I'm not gonna sit here and be Debbie Downer and pour out the data. We already know it, we live it. That's not what I want to do here today. And so before I start the meat of my talk, I wanna share a story with you of two mothers. I have two mothers. One, Maria, she comes from a resource-secure community. And then I have Tanya, who comes from an under-resourced community. Let me give you some data and some information on Maria. Maria lives in the suburbs. It's a neighborhood, it's well-maintained housing, green space, low crime rate. She lives in a stable housing. She owns her home with safe infrastructure, meaning she's not plagued with mold, pests, and the list goes on. It's reliable in terms of utility. She lives close to quality schools for her children. She works a 9-to-5 job with healthcare benefit, quality healthcare benefit, because I want to accentuate that. She has children who attend after-school program that she can pay out of her pocket, and they walk to school and to the park and to the library safely. In terms of stressors, it's the typical stressors that she experiences in the sense of balancing work and children. She's supported by her families, friends, and the resources that her community provides. In terms of health, she has regular access to primary, and if she needs additional health care, she does have access. In terms of mental health, it's stable with occasional management, and so when she or her children needs the care for mental health, she can seek therapy in an unbiased and supportive manner. Now, there are some barriers that we have to layer onto her. some systemic barriers. She has benefited historically from public funding services, equitable zoning laws that we see here across the state, and also generational wealth due to no history of redlining. And I'll come back to the concept of redlining. Can you hear me? Okay. How about now? Okay. Sometime when I teach, I have to ask, can you hear me? All right, because I could see it's a little bit off. All right, that's fine. So that was Maria's live story or live experience. Now we have Tanya. Tanya lives in an under-resourced community. It's her community or her home is located in an urban neighborhood with neglected infrastructure that we often see blighted, high crime, and also there's frequent presence of police activities, night, day, you name it. She rents an apartment and it's deteriorating. It has mold and oftentimes is infested with roaches or mice and have inconsistent eating. She's currently facing eviction threat due to raising costs of rent. She works 2 part-time jobs without benefit. She relies on unpredictable public transportation. Her children attend an understaffed school and witness neighborhood crime often. In terms of stressors, she's constantly fearful. She's fearful for herself and most of all for her children. Her son exhibits anxiety after witnessing neighborhood violence. When we look at health, her son has asthma, and both of them suffer from insomnia due to the frequency of activities in their community. And when we think about mental health, she doesn't have access or quality access for mental health, especially when she's experiencing mental health crises for herself or her children. Now, her community has been historically redlined, meaning it has been disinvested for some time. And so she is experiencing the impact of this. She lacks livable wage job, as I noted earlier. Her children attend underfunded, under-resourced school, and she constantly faces racial discrimination in housing that reinforces this poverty cycle that we see that she's depicting. Now, I share these 2 mothers with you. Perhaps you know someone who's experiencing either case. Perhaps you've read it on the news. But I want to ask you, and I want you to think about this. What about these 2 mothers' story that resonates with you? Right? I'm quite sure you're sitting there and you're thinking about the condition that they're experiencing. And it's natural to have that first inclination that, the mother they're experiencing, one is experiencing quality life, and the other, Tanya, is experiencing poor health outcome alongside with her child. So when we look at this historical trauma continuing from generation to generation, you see where it's passing on. Now, what if I tell you the experience of both mothers aren't really the condition that they find themselves in, but it's more than what we see, right? Because oftentimes when we see it in the news, we have family members or you have experienced it, and you're thinking immediately to yourself, like, why am I in this position? Why am I experiencing this? Why am I going through this cycle day in and day out? Now, for us to put some context and kind of bring you back to the title of my talk, that is more than social, because what you're seeing is the social aspect, the condition of everyday life. But we're not seeing the root cause of why Tanya is expressing or living in this cycle of poverty. I want you to paint this picture. I'm going to use an analogy, right? Let's visualize health determinant using a tree. We see trees outside, we plant trees in our house, in our yard. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use this to illustrate how foundational political decisions shape the structure and the conditions leading to health outcome for both mothers. I call this a tree of health equity and racial equity. Imagine a large, complex tree representing the health of a community or a population. Just think about this large tree, right? Now, to understand the magnitude or the gravity of both mother's circumstances, and I want you, after you leave this talk, to think beyond the individual who's experiencing it, but more the factors that are impacting both mothers, which will have ripple effect, not in one generation, but another generation to come. And how do we stop that? Now, think about the tree, right? We have roots, we have trunks, we have branches, and we have leaves. When you walk down the street, oftentimes, what do you see? The leaves, the branches. You see what is the byproduct of this. Now let's peel this back a little. We have the roots, right? This is what we call the political determinants of health, okay? And so when we look at the roots, which is the political determinants of health of the tree, these are the deepest and often unforeseen foundation. They represent systems, processes, and action of governments, institutions, corporations, and sometimes global actors. That the structure of relationship, the distribution of resources in different communities, the administration of power. So when we look at the structure of the tree or political determinants of health, we have to look at the root. It involves voting, government structures, laws, policies, regulations, and the influence of lobbying and political ideologies, right? But let's bring it back to the tree, right? The root. Just as a root anchor the tree and draw fundamental nutrients and water from the soil, representing power, resources, and societal value, so does political determinants of health, which determines how resources like funding in our community, for social programs, environmental protection, or education, how these are allocated and whose voice are heard, who's at the table, and if you're at the table, are you really representing your community or you're a placeholder? And what rule governs our society? So that's the root, right? Now, let's go to the trunks, which is now the structure, the structural determinants of health. It represents the main visible structure that we see, but we often don't see, because we're only looking at the branches and the leaves. And it's rising from the roots. These are the macro level issues like socioeconomic status and political contexts that shape by these roots, these political determinants of health. They include social, economical, and the political mechanism that generate this stratification, this divide, and inequality, such as discrimination, economic systems, and these broad-scale social policy that impact us day in and day out. And I could list many policies, and we'll come back to that later because I'll use it to make a take-home message. So let's look at the trunk again. We see this big structure. We don't often see the roots, probably kids because they're very observant. As we get older, we start losing just the detailness as what a child would pick up on. The trunk channels the resources that's drawn up by the roots, giving the tree its fundamental shape and strength. Its health and integrity depend directly on the root. A strong, straight trunk indicates fair and robust structure. Now, a weak, diseased, twisted trunk reflects system of inequities and discriminatory structure, right? Now we're gonna make our way to the branches and the leaves, because that's what we see most of the time. It's spreading out from the trunk, the branches and the leaves. It represents specific condition that I noted in the story of Maria and Tanya, in which we as people are born, grow, live, worship, and eventually will age. These are the circumstances that individuals like Maria and Tanya experience in our community day in and day out. But all we're seeing is their condition. We're not seeing the trunks and the roots. The branches and the leaves are where life visible happen. That's what we see, that's what we hear, where the trees interact directly with the immediate environment, such as the sunlight and the air. The strength of the trunk and the resources supplied from the root determine the health, the density, and the reach of the branches that represent these tangible aspects of life that we experience day in and day out. Now, every tree has some kind of byproduct that it gives to us, whether it's fruits or flower or something that we, if I'm walking down the street, I have a 6-year-old, she'll most likely see the apple, or she may see everything up, but she's probably going to gravitate, oh, mommy, there go the apple. Now, we look at these apple or these fruit as the health outcomes, right? The fruits are the final products. It represents health and well-being of a particular community or a population. The fruits, they're in quantity, possibly quality, and distribution depend on the health of the entire tree structure, right? So from the roots all the way up to the trunk, to the branches, and to the leaf. Now, when you have good, equitable, and juicy fruits, it represents positive health outcome, like Maria. High life expectancies, low chronic and mental health, good mental health, low infant mortality, and we have health equity, meaning minimal level of disparities in our population. They are in abundance, healthy, nourishing, access to all. And as a result, we have a fair distribution of political determinants of health. Not equal, fair, because we could have another conversation about fair and equitable. Now, we know that's not the case. Not all trees grow up and flourish and we have juicy fruits. That's not how life is. Now, you may have the rotten, spoiled fruit, lack of resources, maybe few, unequally distributed. They represent poor health outcome that we see in the news, where it's driving up our disparity and continue to drive up our disparity, where we have high infant mortality. We've seen a lot of particular Black mothers are dying during childbirth. We see a lot of violence in our community. And so as a result of this, we have high level of mental health challenges in our community. So what this looks like, we have large-scale health inequity. So these fruits may be scarce, may be stunted, may be diseased, or concentrated only in certain parts of the tree where others, there aren't any. This results from this unfair, neglected political determinants of health, the roots of discriminatory structures, determinants, and adverse social conditions that we see, as pointed out by Maria. Now, I'm going to bring you back to the story of Maria and Tanya. What if I tell you that both mothers are experiencing the effects of political determinants of health? Unequal political determinants of health. Are you familiar with the concept of redlining? Just a show of hand. Are you familiar? Okay. So when we think of redlining, in the 1930s, right, when the government-sponsored Home Ownership Loan Corporation and the Federal Home Loan Bank Board use red lines. So what they'll literally do will get a map and put a red line, and wherever red lines were, those were black communities that were not deemed suitable for white and black to mix. So you kind of segregate. It's a form of segregation. It was segregation. So they segregated communities. And so those who live in the red line had disinvestment, as we're seeing in Tanya's case. These political and structural determinants of health have resulted in lack of investment, as I noted. And if I tell you, the redlining, which was directly stemmed down from political determinants of health, that occurred 1930s. It's almost 100 years later, and we're still seeing the effect of redlining. Now, I could use some other policies that are out there. Right now, there are some policies under attack when we look at maternal health and just community health, period. But I think this one have ripple effect because it cut through so many aspects of our lives. We know that from a disparity standpoint, Maria's family is thriving. She have access to preventive care, while Tanya's family is struggling with untreated chronic diseases. Oftentimes, she may miss appointment because she has to go to work. Now, which one is more convenient? Do I provide food for my child, or maybe I miss the appointment with hope that I'll be able to survive and whatever I could treat at home for my child? Maria lives in a community that has not experienced redlining. This historical political determinants of health that created the segregation that we're seeing today, the disinvestment that we're seeing in our urban spaces. And so Tanya lives in this particular community. And so just think about the condition that she's experiencing, how this political determinants of health from the roots all the way up to the trunk, now we're seeing the livable condition that she's experiencing. You know, when we think about segregation in this concept of redlining, it's natural for blacks, brown, and even immigrant, myself as an immigrant to this country, to live in a neighborhood that people look like us, but not understanding the concept, the history. Because obviously we have this enclave because we want the support, especially when you have immigrant come into the population. So we come into this community not knowing. It may be better, a little bit better than where we're coming from, so we think, but over time, this wear and tear on the body, because most of the time when we come here, we're healthy as immigrants. And as we live longer and we have our children, we see where our health is deteriorating. And so we look at these political determinants of health, and we look at these two mothers' story, whether it resonates with you or someone you know. And I use this tree analogy to highlight the abundance of health and equity when we distribute fruits. That's if we have good outcome. But we must, as collective, look beyond this immediate branches and trees, the individual circumstances that we find ourselves in, or family in, or friends, neighbors, like Tanya. We must examine and address the integrity of our trunks. And the most fundamentally, nourish and repair our roots. We're at a pivotal time in history where we have to look closely at our roots because it has ripple effects. Focusing only on the leaf that I often see as a public health practitioner, you always hear the concept, yeah, let's just address the social determinants of health. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a problem, right? The problem will not fix, and we're continuing to blame the victim. So when I teach this concept with my student, I said, I want you to leave this discussion today to look beyond the individual and look at the broader scale of what are the factors why this young lady is in this position. Now, I could have given you a different story. I could have said you have a teenager, she's 13, and she's pregnant. Do you blame her? Do you blame her family? Do you blame her community? Who do you blame if she comes from a disinvested community? I often use that example with my students. And at the end of the story, I often tell them who is that person. I am a product of a teen mother. And so I use that story to share with my students to see where are they going to focus on. Are you going to attack my mother? You're going to attack other single mothers who find themselves in that position? And when they shared their story, and I said, what if I tell you that is my story? Not me having the baby, but me as the byproduct of that, right? And so what I share that anecdote as my personal experience and my family experience as an immigrant, that I call on our local government, because we have to start at the local level, right? I call on our funders because they're providing the fund to fund the services in our community. Rather than just focusing on just the condition, start branching out, right? Try to change the system, what we call policy, system, and environmental change, because those are the things that are sustainable. A one-time event, I'm sorry, it's nice, you get people together, but you won't solve the problem. It has to be sustainable. It has to be built in from the very beginning. Now, as a public health practitioner, and we put our program out there, and I've worked with community-based organizations, we need to evaluate the programs that are put in out there to make the change that we're trying to see. Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Are they effective? And also, you want to ask the question, are you using taxpayers' money well enough to see the change and attack the roots? And so another thing that I often kind of close on, if you're ever at the table to develop policy, whether it's in this space, in a faith-based organization, or outside of a faith-based organization, when we think about policy development, we need to ask those persons, if you're not at the table, what are the health benefits that are going into the policy, what we call health in all policy. If we have health in all policies, much of the adverse condition that we're seeing will be addressed because we were very intentional in protecting and sustaining population level health. And so I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to present this to you. I think we need to do this collaboratively. We got to start at the very bottom. We can't start from the top up. I often say needs need to be expressed from the bottom, not from the top down. And with that said, I hope with that conversation, I close out on a good note in how we can drive to have social justice. Thank you. And so I open up the floor now for question, comments.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Supriyo S.B. Chatterjee. Just SB is fine. I'm a Connecticut Health Foundation Healthcare Leadership Fellow, and I've come in from the economics, technology side, and slowly into healthcare. And for the past almost 10 years now, I've been a Health Leadership Fellow. I'm very fascinated, and I've studied a lot about social determinants of health. The concern I have is really about public health, more on the preventive medicine side. And they say that your health is really determined by your zip code and not your genetic code. And it sounds very odd, but even after we went through a 3-4 year period of COVID with tremendous destruction. I mean, it was a very, very bad period, for me personally too. How can we improve literally in the systemic side of it? And the Connecticut Health Foundation is also very concerned about, I do not represent them, let's not get that out. how can we change it, bring it into the system? We have always been on the fringe, we have always been on the outside, but we need to get it to be part. It should be part of Hartford Healthcare, it should be part of Yukon Health, it could be part of Trinity St. Francis Hospital, or any of the health centers. But we need to embed this within the system itself. I still feel that's such a difficult task. So I welcome your suggestions on how to get it inside the system itself. We need that.
Right.
you.
And that's, that's another, you could present on that longer. So I appreciate you sharing the background with me, your background. I don't have the answer, but as a public health practitioner, a researcher, a scientist, what I would suggest, right? We're in this space, we're in a faith-based state, and we'll use this as an example. I'm also in academia, right? And the way that we have to start thinking about disrupting the system, one, from an academic standpoint, we need to be intentional in the curriculum design for our young people, right? We know that we are at a position where our workforce will not reflect the disproportionate population, right? We're there. It's not something that we can undo at this very moment. But what we can do is to be intentional when we are creating these curriculum to inform and educate the next generation, right? To be culturally, to practice cultural humility, right? We talk about cultural competence. There's no way that we can be competent in someone else's culture, right? Because if you tell me that you're culturally competent, you're telling me I've learned what it is to be a Jamaican, I don't need anything else. I've learned it all in just one lecture. Well, when you look at it from a cultural humility, when you infuse those in your curriculum, right? It's a lifelong process that when I interact with my patient, I am learning how to be the best provider for my patient, right? So that's why you're gonna have to start dismantling the system at that interpersonal level. At the institutional level, the institutional need to be held accountable to have these practices and training ongoing, not one time to fill or to do a checkbox. But right now we're in a political climate where a lot of the agencies that are receiving public fund are very cautious of infusing. If they had those in mind, they're pulling it back just to soothe or to go back to their original thought process or practice, right? So I can't tell you that I have a definitive answer for that. In this space, as in faith-based organization, we have a congregation, right? It's important for us to have representative in different spaces. So whether it's a hospital, a community-based organization, there should be advisory boards that advise these institutions of the express need that's going on in the community and how best to serve it, and also how to address these roots and trunks and eventually the leaves. I could also think about, I had another thought, it'll come back to me. But I hope that is sufficient, but I can't tell you that I have the full, I could only make suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. I so appreciate the juxtaposition of cultural competency and cultural humility. Thank you for sharing that. You spoke about cultural humility from the providers. And I'm wondering if there exists, or how can we as community provide resources and tools for women of color to be more equipped and empowered to navigate the challenges that are presented during a health crisis at the interpersonal level. And I can speak first-hand experience. When you're at the hospital giving birth, the way a woman of color is treated may differ from the way a woman of the dominant culture is treated. And how do we empower and prepare and equip our women of color to navigate those challenges in a way that encourage the other who is providing the treatment to respect their dignity as a human being.
Right. And that's a very interesting question. Just looking at cultural humility and just maternal health, period, because we're in a crisis. You know, our black women are dying. We think our black women who are of low economic status are dying. Those aren't the ones who are dying. It's our high-income black women who are dying. So it's not access to care, right? It's those implicit structural things that I talk with you about that are impacting. There are organizations out there. There's one that I work with, Lucinda's house. Lucinda's house, that's all around Lucinda's house, that provides services to the community about the different aspect of birthing, whether it's pre, during, and post. I think the information are out there, is just not it's not penetrating in the population as it should. So we are not doing a good job penetrating and distributing the information to the population that really, really need it. And I'm happy to connect you with her, because she does a lot of community baby showers, a lot of workshops around peri, during, and postpartum to address the issue that's disproportionately affecting black women. She'll also talk about the role of doulas. At Connecticut is shifting where, I don't know where we are right now with reimbursement from our healthcare providers to provide those supportive care that wouldn't have been received in a healthcare setting that does not reflect what the population look like. So those are something, but we just need to be more, we need to stop operating in silos, right? And just present the information, because the more people know, and we're in a time where it's accessible to your finger. You could lay in the bed and read it. You could lay in bed and be on a webinar. If you want one-on-one consultation, that's a possibility, but we're just not saturating it in the population that really needs it. And I'm happy to connect you with Dr. Canty. Yes.
Okay, this will be our last question before lunch, and then we can continue the conversation over lunch.
Now, which question do I ask? Okay, I'll go back. You talked about Maria and Tanya, and under the different environment where their families lived. But one thing that was missing was what color, of what race they were. And I have found that when I've gone to the doctor or whatever, and as Dean Lena said, they look at the color of your skin first before even thinking whether you can afford to, or what insurance you have. I've been in situations where once they found out that, oh yes, I'm a state employee, therefore you have good insurance, then the care is different.
No, yours is a good point. And I could have added that Maria was Hispanic, right? Maria is Hispanic, she lives in a suburbs community, and then I could add that Tanya is a black woman, right? But I did not I intentionally withheld that information just to see what your thought process would be like. Because you could have said Tanya is a white, you could have said Maria is a white woman, right, in a suburb community, versus Tanya. Tanya could pass as white or black, but when you start, layering like the neighborhood, I leave that for you to draw your own conclusion, right? I'm already coming in with some set of biases. I don't want to bias you anymore. But here's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed, for your enlightening lecture and your responses to questions. And I'm sure Dr. Reed will be willing to continue some of the conversation while we get something to eat. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.